This is Pet Life Radio. Let's talk pets.
Hi, y'all, and welcome to Horsing Around. Saddle up and get ready to have a darn tootin', galloping good time as we trot out the show that's your ultimate horse sorts, of course. Find out how to use good old horse sense when it comes to breeding, feeding, training, and explaining. From practical tips on caring for your horse's health to advice on how to buy horse supplies, including bridles, halters, saddles, and more. So get ready to start horsing around with your host, horse expert and award-winning rider, Audrey Pavia. Howdy, Audrey.
Welcome to Horsing Around on PetLifeRadio.com. Thanks for joining us. This week we're going to talk about dressage. Dressage has been around a long time and became a popular training discipline in the U.S. during the 1990s. Today it's one of the most widely sought after of all equestrian sports. Today we're going to talk to dressage rider Jennifer O. Bryant, editor of USDF Connection, the official publication of the United States Dressage Federation, and author of the book, The USDF Guide to Dressage. We'll talk to Jennifer right after these messages.
Why the long face? I reckon Horsing Around will be back in the saddle right after we round up a few words from our sponsors.
It's DesignerPetSweaters.com. Hand-knitted designer sweaters for your precious pup or cool cat. Beautiful couture patterns for your pets, including custom-knitted formal wear, casual wear, yachting, and even sports-themed. Many designer pet sweaters include feathered tammy hats, top hats, and a lot of sparkle. Each sweater includes leg loops, front paw sleeves, and leash opening. Visit DesignerPetSweaters.com to order your four-legged fashions today. Your pets will stay warm for the winter and be runway ready. Large or small, we fit them all. DesignerPetSweaters.com.
Let's Talk Pets on PetLifeRadio.com.
We know you're chomping at the bit to hear more horsing around. Well, we're back on the trail. So park yourself over yonder and set a spell. You ain't heard nothing yet.
Welcome back to Horsing Around. I'm your host, Audrey Pavia, and today we are going to talk to author Jennifer O. Bryant about dressage. Welcome, Jennifer.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Sure. First off, why don't we tell everybody what dressage is exactly?
Well, it's pretty simple. Dressage is a French word that roughly translated means training, and it's basically the athletic and gymnastic development of the horse.
And why is it so popular in recent times here in the U.S.?
I think it's become really popular for several reasons. One is we have many horse enthusiasts who are getting a little bit older, and some of these people, when they hit a certain point in their lives, things like jumping no longer seem quite as attractive as they did when they were younger, and they may be looking for an equestrian sport that appears to be a little bit lower on the risk scale. And I think another reason also is that it seems as if a lot of people today are looking for ways to deepen their relationships with their animals, including their equine partners, and looking for ways to really develop a partnership over time in a way that goes beyond something short-term or what they might perceive as merely using the horse as a tool to accomplish something. And dressage is really an ongoing process of developing the horse and rider gymnastically and psychologically as well in many ways, and really can be a very deep and satisfying relationship. And I think a lot of people have found that very appealing.
What is it about dressage that requires so much athleticism from the horse?
Well, it is teaching the horse to, first of all, in a sense, move with a rider with the same degree of balance and lightness and ease as he does at liberty. And obviously, with the weight of a rider, his balance is affected. And so dressage training is teaching him, in essence, to change the way that he balances, and this requires strength and suppleness and athletic ability that has to be developed over time. A lot of people equate it to gymnastics or perhaps ballet on horseback. Anybody who's familiar with the sports knows that these are things that are developed overnight, and they take years of slow and patient training. There's some elements of dressage that are actually handed down from military traditions. Some of the so-called upper-level movements are actually things that back in cavalry days and ancient times, horses were taught to do as certain kinds of gymnastic maneuvers to give mounted combatants an advantage when they were in. And obviously these things take great strength and skill. And in essence, the other thing that is going on is the gymnastic development of what dressage riders consider to be the three basic gaits of walk, trot, and canter. The purpose being not to change these in any sort of an unnatural way, but to develop the horse athletically to make his gaits as pure and rhythmic and even and beautiful as possible.
Tell me a little bit about the carriage, the way a horse is supposed to carry himself in dressage, what that carriage is and why it's called for.
In dressage, the objective as a horse advances in his training is to develop not only pushing power forward from the hindquarters, but also to develop what's called collection, which is essentially the lightening of the horse's forehand by teaching him and enabling him to shift some of his own body weight to his hindquarters and take more weight over his haunches by bending the large joints of his hindquarters. If you've ever done exercises like squats and lunges, you know how much power it takes to do something like that. The horse is naturally built with more of his weight over his front legs and his forehand, and in the development of collection, we shift the weight more over the hindquarters, thereby lightening the forehand. So a horse in higher level dressage can move with great lightness and ease, and also with great power and energy.
And it takes a while for a horse to build up the muscle that it needs to do this. Is that right?
Generally, a dressage horse's career is among the longer careers in the equestrian world. Typically, a dressage horse is started under saddle perhaps a little later than some other breeds and sports. Part of that is because some of the primary types of horses that are used in dressage tend to mature a little bit late. They're often seriously started under saddle until around the age of 4. They may be introduced to saddle a little bit younger than that, but really their bones and muscles need some time to develop. So they're started a little bit later, and it can take several years. You know, a horse may be just reaching, if all goes well, the top levels of the sport not until he is, say, around the age of 10. And even then, he will continue to develop and gain strength and blossom at the highest level, called the Grand Prix level, for a number of years. And it's not at all unusual to see top dressage horses, even internationally, say in the Olympics. It's very common for them to be certainly in their teens, not unheard of to be in their late teens. And there are many, many stories of dressage horses perhaps not performing at the Olympic level, but going on to become what are called schoolmasters and teaching a younger generation of riders, giving them of some of the movements and things, well into their 20s.
It sounds like it must not be as hard on the joints and the muscles and stuff than some of the other disciplines.
Well, you don't have the incredible impacts that one might associate with racing or perhaps jumping, where you are landing on the foreleg. The dressage horse is all of his work is on the flat, so to speak. He does not jump, although people sometimes do use jumping as a gymnastic exercise in developing the training, but jumping is not actually part of the sport per se. So there perhaps is a little bit less obvious pounding. They certainly can sustain injuries. I mean, if you've ever lifted weights till you got really tired, you know, if you work when you're fatigued, you can definitely get an overuse injury. Dressage horses can and do sustain some soft tissue injuries, pulled suspensory ligaments, things like that. But in general, yes, they if properly cared for and properly trained and not pushed too hard, they can have very long careers.
You mentioned, a couple times Grand Prix level. What are the different levels in dressage, and how are they different from each other?
Well, there are what are called the nationals, and each country's own National Equestrian Federation would be responsible for the nation of those levels, and in fact they do differ from nation to nation in terms of what they're called, although they roughly mirror one another in terms of what they are asking of the horse. But in the United States, the United States Equestrian Federation administers and writes what are called the dressage tests at the different levels, which begin with what's called training level and progressing up the national levels, first level, second level, third level, fourth level, and then you would make the progression to the international levels, which, as the name suggests, is used internationally and administered by the FEI, or International Equestrian Federation, and those levels are Prix St. George, Intermediaire 1, Intermediaire 2, and Grand Prix for competition purposes. And each of those levels contains one or more so-called tests, which are basically patterns of prescribed gaits and movements, and they are progressive in terms of difficulty.
What kind of maneuvers or moves would you see in training level as opposed to, say, third level or fourth level?
At training level, you're basically going to see the three basic gaits. You're going to see walk, trot, canter. You are going to see changes of direction and circles and transitions between the gaits. And the judge is looking for a horse that looks to have a solid foundation, three pure basic gaits, and a good, solid gymnastic foundation being laid for the future training. When you get up to, say, third level, you are seeing some things that require collection, such as what's called the half pass, which is a lateral movement in which the horse is traveling both forward and sideways. Gymnastically, takes a lot of strength and suppleness to be able to do that equally in both directions. As anybody knows who's ever tried to do an exercise both ways, just as we typically have a strong side and a stiff side, horses do too. So we are working to supple and strengthen them equally, and also to make their bodies what's called straight. Horses tend to travel with their haunches to the inside, and in order to straighten them and allow for collection, we need to narrow the way that they travel with their hind legs and bring their forehand, their shoulders, a bit to the inside, again requiring quite a lot of gymnastic suppling and strengthening. You also at third level would see things being introduced such as flying changes of lead in the canter, in which the horse changes from one lead to the other in mid-stride.
We're going to take a break, and when we come back, I'm going to ask Jennifer about the Lipizzan stallions, because a lot of people know who they are. So we'll be right back after these messages.
Why the long face? I reckon Horsing Around will be back in the saddle right after we round up a few words from our sponsors.
Molly, here's your dinner. Zeus, that's not your food.
Don't let that happen to your precious cat. Elevate your cat's eating experience with the Cat Tree Tray. The Cat Tree Tray keeps your cat's food off the floor and conveniently located on the cat tree. It's the perfect way to eat. It's a beautiful wrought iron tray that easily attaches to your cat tree and keeps dogs and other critters out of your cat's dish. A must for multi-pet households. There's a 6-inch tray for large bowls and a 4-inch tray for smaller bowls. Purchase your Cat Tree Tray today. Go right now to cattreetray.com. That's cattreetray.com. CATTREETRAY.com.
Let's Talk Pets on PetLifeRadio.com.
We know you're chomping at the bit to hear more horsing around. Well, we're back on the trail. So park yourself over yonder and set a spell. You ain't heard nothing yet.
Hi, welcome back to Horsing Around. I'm your host, Audrey Pavia, and today we are talking to author Jennifer Bryant about dressage. Jennifer, a lot of people have heard of the Lipizzans, gone to see shows around the country where Lipizzan stallions are performing. How does the dressage that they do differ from the type of dressage we've been talking about, or does it?
It does differ in some regards. The foundation of the training is exactly the same. The Lipizzan stallions are associated most primarily with the Spanish riding school of Vienna, in Vienna, Austria. They demonstrate dressage as it was handed down since Renaissance type times, when that aspect of the sport, although they didn't really call it a sport, it was more a horsemanship pastime of the aristocracy, and they used Spanish stock, the Lipizzan breed, which had a real aptitude for extremely collected work. If you see the Lipizzans in performance, you will see them demonstrate the 3 basic gaits, the walk, trot, and canter. You will see them do the lateral movements, the flying changes of lead, everything that would be demonstrated in a modern dressage test up to the Grand Prix level, including the highest levels of collection as used in modern-day dressage competition, which are 2 movements called the piaffe and the passage. Beyond that, you will see some specialized things that are not required in competition, such as what are known as the airs above the ground, and these really do have military origins, movements in which the horse actually does either raise his forehand entirely off the ground or actually does propel himself off the ground into the air. And he can do this with a rider, without a rider, being worked in hand or on what are called long lines, or even between 2 pillars. And these are very specialized, ancient, classical horsemanship traditions that are truly probably the pinnacle of what a horse can achieve in dressage, and these are not required in competition, but they are spectacular to see.
And Lipizzans are pretty rare. What are the breeds that are typically seen in dressage, or especially at the upper level competitions?
Well, you do see the occasional Lipizzan. You see some of his, I guess I'd call them cousins, the Iberian type breeds, Andalusians, Lusitanos, and so forth, have become increasingly popular in recent years. But primarily, the type of horse that has dominated the sport, at least for the past couple of decades, has been what's generally referred to as the warm blood. And these are sport horse breeds, most of which originated in different parts of Europe, many of which are named for the countries or regions in Europe in which they were developed. You have a breed called the Swedish warm blood, the Dutch warm blood. In Germany, they're named for the regions, Hanoverian, Holsteiner, and so forth. And there are some others as well. And these actually descended from horses that were used as driving stock, because, of course, that's primarily what a lot of people used to. They were either using their horses for farm work, and you had your draft-type breeds, or they were being used for transportation. And of course, driving was a main mode of transportation. Over time, people were driving less. Cars were introduced. Horses became more of a hobby than a way of life. And these horses, which were developed to have a lot of athletic ability, they began to be bred more specifically for jumping ability and also for dressage ability, and to have beautiful gaits and a balanced conformation, powerful hindquarters, the ability to have a great deal of shoulder freedom, which both enhance jumping and dressage movement for extended gaits, as well as the ability to collect. And so these sport horses, which have been developed for these purposes over many years, do tend to dominate the sport, particularly at the higher levels.
But at the lower levels, like, say, schooling shows and some of the smaller shows that we see, there's a lot of different breeds in there. Isn't that true?
Oh, for sure. Particularly at the lower levels of dressage, certainly in this country, many breeds can be seen. Many people compete very successfully with thoroughbreds, quarter horses, Appaloosas, pretty much you name it. It's in a dressage arena somewhere. There is no reason that a horse with 3 decent basic gaits and is sound cannot do perfectly respectably at the lower levels.
Is there a confirmation?
He may not have the ability to be able to learn piaffe and passage, but if he can walk, trot, canter, he can probably compete at, training at first level for sure.
Are there conformational issues there? Like, are certain types of conformation less favorable to doing dressage even at the lower levels?
It is more difficult for a horse that is built very what's called downhill, such as one where his croup is higher than his withers, so he is naturally, even more so than the standard horse build, which is something like 60% of his weight on his forehand. A horse that's kind of built that way is obviously going to find it a little bit harder to develop collection and be able to lighten that forehand and learn to shift his weight and carry more weight over his hindquarters. It's not impossible, but it may just be a little bit hard. It may be harder for him from the get-go. Likewise, a horse with a very straight shoulder that has difficulty moving freely is going to struggle perhaps a little bit with extended gaits in which the horse is asked to move with as long a stride as possible. Those kinds of conformational issues, crooked movement, like leg conformation, such that it could create soundness problems. Obviously, that kind of thing would also be somewhat of a hindrance.
Right. Now, can dressage principles be applied to other disciplines?
Oh, sure, and in fact, they are. If anybody has ever read about how the, for example, our show jumpers train, our U.S. show jumping team just won the Olympic gold medal in Hong Kong in 2008. They use many dressage principles in suppling and developing their horses. The old saying is something like dressage is what you do between the fences, because that entails the adjustability of the horse's stride, the ability to rock him back on his hindquarters, to get him ready for a large obstacle, the ability to turn him equally well in both directions in order for him to be as quick and athletic and maneuverable as possible. All of that is basically dressage. And then of course you have the most obvious one, which is the sport of eventing, which has 3 phases, the first one of which is a dressage phase. And then they go on to a cross-country jumping course and then a show jumping course. And, and so they're judged on their dressage, moreover, and then apply those principles when they are jumping. Again, a lot of it comes down to adjustability and maneuverability and overall athletic development.
What about in Western riding?
Well, the sport that is referred to by many as Western dressage would be the sport of reining, in which the horse is not moving in exactly the same way that perhaps the dressage riders train for, but they are certainly showing the training for incredible maneuverability, the ability to lengthen and collect their stride, speed up, slow down, great hindquarter strength used for rollbacks and turns and things like that. You don't do if you do a sliding stop in dressage, you've kind of done something wrong. So you don't do that, but many of the basic underlying principles are very, very cross-discipline.
Now, I mentioned at the beginning of the show that you are the editor of USDF Connection, the official publication of the United States Dressage Federation, and author of the book, The USDF Guide to Dressage. Tell us a little bit about the USDF.
The USDF is the national, primarily educational federation for dressage in the United States. It was founded about 30 years ago by a group of people who wanted to promote the sport in this country, which really is, compared to the horsemanship tradition, say in Europe, it really is fairly young. And the USDF's primary mission is education. And to that end, it has an instructor certification program for certifying dressage instructors and trainers. It developed a model of training dressage judges, introducing people who were interested in becoming judges to the principles of judging. It's now called the USDF L Education Program, L being standing for learner. And this model is so successful that it has actually been copied in some foreign countries. Those are just two of its major educational initiatives. It also offers quite an extensive array of awards programs, very prestigious Horse of the Year type awards at the different levels, and a very large and successful All Breeds Awards program, which is conducted in cooperation with many, many independent breed registries to recognize dressage accomplishment by horses in all these different breeds, like we were discussing before. But the USDF its mission is education and recognition of achievement and promotion of the sport of dressage.
Okay, and your book is called the USDF Guide to Dressage. Tell us a little bit about the book and what people would find in there.
Well, it's the first commercially published book to receive the USDF endorsement. It is really an introduction to the sport for the person who doesn't know anything about it. That's really what it was intended to be. It's intended to be for the person who perhaps they've ridden before. They may have a horse, they may do some other kind of equestrian sport and have an interest in dressage and want to find out more about it and perhaps get started. And so it, unlike a lot of the other dressage books out there that used to frustrate me when I was learning, it assumes no prior knowledge and tries to really introduce the budding enthusiast to the sport from the ground up, and goes as high as second level, which is kind of the introduction of collection. And it's everything from attire and equipment to basic training, what to look for. It's not how to win at shows, although there is a section on going to shows and show protocol and what to expect in the levels and that kind of thing, but it does not assume that competition is your stated goal. Some people get into the sport and they decide at some point that they would like to go to a show because, unlike in other equestrian sports, in dressage you actually get a judge's critique. You don't walk out of the ring and not really know why the judge, placed you or didn't place you. In dressage, the judge actually fills out a sheet, and you get a numerical score for each movement along with comments. And then you get kind of summary comments at the end of the test. So you are actually handed this piece of paper with literally a blow-by-blow critique of the test that you just rode, and this can be an excellent way to benchmark your progress, get an assessment of yourself and your horse from an impartial expert. It's a great way of getting feedback. And so some people decide that they want to compete, if for no other reason than they want to benchmark their progress. But for whatever reason, it does include competition, but There are many people who just enjoy the sport and kind of enjoy the journey and enjoy the learning process, and they don't care whether or not they ever go to the show. So the book is for those riders as well as those who might one day think about competing.
Well, unfortunately, that's all the time we have for today. Thanks, Jennifer, for being my guest this week.
Thank you for having me.
Sure. And everybody, please check out Jennifer's book, The USDF Guide to Dressage, to learn more about this very fun sport. And if you go to the episode notes page for Horsing Around, you'll find out more about Jennifer and the book and where you can get it. So if you have any questions or comments about Horsing Around, please email me at audrey@petliferadio.com. Until next time, happy trails.
Stop what you're doing and start horsing around every week on Pet Life Radio. Horse expert and award-winning rider Audrey will be trotting out great tips on feeding, breeding, and more on everything equestrian. So set a spell and say hey to Audrey and get ready for a darn tootin' galloping good time every week on Horsing Around, on demand, only on PetLifeRadio.com.